All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig in a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video. Nick Wright taking more shots at Brock Purdy. We'll talk about it next. First, we're brought to you by Pig in a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig in a Pickle. Go get the brisket chili. Go say hi to Damon and Mary and tell them that Krug sent you. And this video brought to you by Sharp Corners Sports Cards and Collectibles. They're at 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove, California, along the Monterey Peninsula. Call my friend Anthony Catania. He's at 831-521-5264. All right. Well, Brock Purdy struggled, and it's amazing. It's hilarious. Brock Purdy was PFF's highest graded quarterback in the entire NFL coming into this game against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. He had better individual numbers than Mahomes. There was talk coming out of the Chiefs camp that their coaches were saying that he looks like the MVP of the league and that there's, Spags like there's no weakness to this quarterback. And then the Chiefs came out and their defense was incredible. The Niners couldn't get anything done on third down. Purdy went 17 of 31 for 212 yards, 3 picks, 2 rushing touchdowns, and the Niners were a disaster on third down. They couldn't convert on third down against Kansas City. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of criticism for Brock Purdy. And Nick Wright, who's one of the guys who's just hates Brock Purdy and is always waiting to crush Brock Purdy, lays out these numbers. And it's so disingenuous because he'll lay out Purdy's numbers with Ayuk, Debo, CMC, Kittle, and Trent, and then his numbers anytime some of those guys are not on the field with Purdy. But it's interesting because that is Brock's team, right? Brock didn't make the team. He didn't draft those guys. He's on this team. So that's his team. He has Ayuk and Debo and CMC and Kittle and Trent Williams. And he's got great, unbelievable, the greatest stats ever with his actual team. But was Nick Wright saying that during this 14-game stretch where Brock Purdy went 13-1 and was totally the best quarterback, maybe statistically ever, was he suggesting that he was great then? No. He's going to wait until he loses and then cherry pick a bunch of stats. So here we go. Let's hear from Nick Wright, and then we'll react to it. Here's Nick with his argument why Purdy sucks.
Guys, if we are being objective and fairly looking at the evidence, one would look at Brock Purdy with all of the Avengers and without and say it's a minorly concerning trend considering Brandon Ayuk is done for the year. We don't know when Christian McCaffrey's coming back. When he has all 5, they only lost in the Super Bowl in overtime. They score his 29-3 touchdown interception. When just one of them or multiple are missing, he immediately becomes bad and the team becomes bad. I'm not making that up.
No, you take away 3 guys. I mean, I don't think that's a Brock Purdy stat per se.
Okay,
yeah,
Purdy
Jalen Hurts is not good
Purdy
with Saquon. Everyone
well
goes.
this year.
Okay,
right.
guys. Well, this year
the only quarterback, and his numbers aren't even good. The only quarterback winning without his Avengers, if you will, is Mahomes.
Okay, so here's the that's
we saw Josh
and the
Allen.
numbers aren't good.
We saw Josh Allen just complete 30% of his passes a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I know, and that was a problem, and we criticized it. Okay, that's fine. If you guys want to argue that Purdy's played really well this year, I disagree. But here's the other thing. Brock Purdy, another objective look at any young player. Did they have a really awful game and the book got out on him a little bit? Is a question we ask all the time. Brock Purdy, before and after the Ravens game. We can show it to you because the numbers, it's just...
Where'd they end up after the Ravens game?
No, they did end up in the Super Bowl. But listen, again, you guys can be... I understand they were in the Super Bowl, and in that playoff run, he was brutal and then excellent in both games. No, I just said brutal and then excellent in both games.
But we just praised Mahomes for being brutal then excellent.
No.
Yeah, he was brutal yesterday, then excellent when it came winning time.
100%.
Same thing Purdy did in the playoffs.
So again, if you think Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes should be held to the same standard, that's fine.
I'd never say that. But what I'm saying is you just sat here and praised Patrick Mahomes for being brutal.
Correct. Yes.
And then being great in winning time.
Exactly.
What was Brock Purdy last year in the playoffs?
Well,
brutal in a couple games. And then what about winning time?
And except for the Super Bowl, he was great in the winning time
in
all those games.
And the Super Bowl, he wasn't bad.
No, that's fine. But that's, again, I'm just saying, you guys can get mad. If it wasn't someone you had such an emotional investment in Wilds, this is what fairness would be. He'd be on Pumpkin Watch.
That's not true.
I'm just telling you, he'd be on Pumpkin Watch.
He's helping
he'd be on Pumpkin Watch. He'd be on Pumpkin Watch.
No, you don't have the right.
What do you mean I don't have the right to
Pumpkin Watch? Pumpkin Watch out of the show, first of all. Now you're trying to co-opt Pumpkin Watch.
No, I tried to take Dud Watch out of the show.
He's on Dud Watch. If everybody's hurt, he's on Dud Watch. He's not on Pumpkin Watch.
Okay.
He's graduated out of Pumpkin Watch.
We took Geno off Pumpkin Watch. Yeah. We're not taking Brock, who's led a team to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, he's been on a team that went to a Super Bowl.
He was fourth in MVP vote.
Okay, how do you think that's going this year? I'm just curious.
I think he's having a better individual season than Mahomes.
Okay, I don't.
Mahomes has an 82 passer rate.
I don't think Brock Purdy's been better than Patrick Mahomes.
No, I'm a quarterback win.
He is too.
Okay, good.
I'm
this year.
Hold on, Dusty's yelling at us.
I am that.
All right. What does the future hold for the Chiefs?
It's a tough game for Brock.
It was.
They're undefeated.
Absolutely.
Kyle Shanahan can't win. I don't care who you put back there.
Shanahan, he's.
Oh, now we're going to kill Shanahan.
Shanahan's never beaten Andy Reid.
He got coach circles.
Now we're going to kill Shanahan.
You know that. You know that.
Dusty, I know. Dusty yelling at me for your behavior.
All right, so there's Nick Wright right there talking about Brock Purdy. And it's like, once again, I think Brock Purdy's been awful this year. He was the number one graded quarterback in the NFL versus PFF. Why not just say that PFF is a total bogus, flawed, fraudulent, ranking? Because they list him as the best, and you're saying he's had a terrible year. All right, coming into this game against Kansas City, Purdy was 5th in QBR, which is the ESPN stat. Mahomes, in the same stat, was 16th. Purdy was 2nd in completion percentage over expected. Mahomes was 23rd. Purdy was leading the NFL in average depth of target. Mahomes was dead last. Chief coaches were making it a point that Purdy was playing like an MVP. I don't think you can say he's had a disastrous year. And the other thing I think it's interesting, it's like, so he showed these stats. Purdy with, with his team, basically. Ayuk, Debo, CMC, Kittle, and Trent Williams. 13-1, 69.9% completion percentage. The only loss was to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And then you look at the numbers. 266 passing yards, 9.4 yards per attempt, 29 touchdowns, 3 picks, passer rating of 120.9. And then you look at Purdy in all other games. So there's 12 games he hasn't had the full contingent of guys. So if you don't, in those 12 games, his completion percentage falls. It falls from 69.9%, we'll say roughly 70%, to 63.6%. So it falls a little bit, but that's not a dramatic drop. His yards per game falls, it's basically identical, 266 to 264. So he's throwing for the exact same yards. His yards per attempt drops only less than a full, 9.4 to 8.5? Less than a full yard. The 29 touchdowns, 3 picks, the one thing that's disingenuous here is that if you look at these numbers, when Purdy has a full contingent of Niners, the team that he's on, he's got numbers that say he's the best quarterback in football. He's got numbers, 29 touchdowns and 3 picks, 13-1, 70%, 9.4 yards per attempt. The guy's completing 70% of his passes, and he's got almost 10 yards per attempt. I mean, these are great numbers. These are incredible numbers. These are numbers of an elite quarterback. But at what point during the 14 weeks that Brock Purdy was accumulating that 13-1 record did you ever hear Nick Wright pop on Fox and say, hey, you know what? Brock Purdy has numbers like an elite quarterback. He can look back at those numbers and say he was playing really well, and now look at him. But he never gave him, it's so disingenuous because he never really gave him the credit when he went 13-1 in those 14 games. The other thing that he's not pointing out is that this is over 2 seasons. These are not the same teams. These are different teams. The 49er team last year was really good. They had Christian McCaffrey. They went to the Super Bowl. They were a really good football team. This year, they're under 500. They haven't won 2 games in a row all year. Their equation is bogged down, and their special teams have been a disaster. What does that have to do with Brock Purdy? Nothing. Their defense, do you think Brock Purdy signed Devondre Campbell and made him be terrible? No, he didn't. So do you think Brock Purdy made the Niners sign Isaac Yiadom and cut Samuel Womack? No. So the 49ers are not as good as they were last year. There's no question about that. But that's the big part of this story. So they lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Otherwise, Brock Purdy's perfect last year. But where was Nick Wright saying he's among the best quarterbacks? He wasn't. He didn't say that. He was doubting him then. And he's now busting out these stats. Now, Purdy in games where he hasn't had a full contingent of stars around him, 4-8, 63.3% completion percentage. But, I mean, the yards per game, the yards per attempt are pretty much the same. The big difference is 3 picks versus 16 picks. And, yeah, that's what happens. When you take away the surrounding cast, the quarterback is the one who feels the pressure and feels the brunt of it. When you took away Patrick Mahomes starting right tackle and left tackle in the Super Bowl against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it was jailbreak on Mahomes. And who won that game? The Bucs, not Mahomes, not Reid, not this incredible dynasty Chief team. Why? Was Mahomes suddenly bad? Was Mahomes suddenly not a good quarterback? Or did his winning equation erode because his right tackle and his left tackle were both out and they didn't have a way to block Tampa Bay's defensive line? So that's really what we're talking about here. You're right. Brock Purdy is better when he's got a full contingent of players. All quarterbacks are going to be better. But, I mean, once again, the yards per game, the yards per attempt, pretty much the same. It's the interceptions. So what happens when you don't have weapons? You have to take chances with lesser weapons. You have to throw more 50-50 balls. It results in turnovers. So, I think anybody would be worse if you took away some of their elite weapons. But it's funny how, nobody ever it's like Mahomes lost a Super Bowl to Tampa Bay, and he lost it because he didn't have his offensive tackles and he couldn't get away from the rush. But was he still Patrick Mahomes? Yeah. Was he still this greatest quarterback of his era? Was he still coached by the greatest head coach in the league today? Yeah. Did he still have the greatest defensive coordinator going right now in Spags? Yeah. Did he still have elite players like Chris Jones and Bolton and McDuffie and Snead and Humphrey? Did he have all these guys around? Yeah, he still had all those guys. But he lost the Super Bowl. Why? Because his equation bogged down. His winning equation bogged down. He couldn't throw because he was being chased by Tampa's defensive line. So that would be my point. I'm not here to apologize for Brock Purdy. He's obviously better with a full contingent of weapons than he is without. But, everybody is. I don't think that's really saying anything. I guess I would say to Nick Wright, okay, so you're saying Brock Purdy had the kinds of stats that would make him an elite quarterback. But what week in those 14 weeks that he accumulated that 13-1 record, did you ever come on this show and say he's got elite numbers? You've always doubted him. And now here you find an avenue where he's on a lesser team with lesser weapons. He's being forced to shoulder the load. And here's the other thing that really isn't. It's a little disingenuous when you make these kinds of comparisons. It's not just like, well, Brock doesn't have great players. The NFL's got a cap. So they're paying a ton of their cap room to these players. So as you pay these players, the divide between the great players on your roster and the players that fill in behind them gets greater. as you pay Ayuk $30 million and Debo $28 million and extend CMC and pay Trent and pay Kittle, those guys take a higher percentage of your cap, and you have a lower percentage of your cap that to feed to spread across the rest of the 45 guys that you have under contract. So yeah, as time goes on and you have great players and you start to pay them, their backups become a whole lot worse. And then when those players go down, what do you got? You don't have a whole lot. So the insult is the talking about Purdy with the pumpkin watch, because the suggestion, or the what he's basically implying there, is that Purdy sucks and that he's been propped up by all these awesome weapons and awesome talent around him, and that if you put him on a normal team, he'd suck. And I don't think the 4-8 record is on a normal team. That's on players, receivers he doesn't have a rapport with, linemen that don't have reps starting. And it really comes back to how good's the Niners bench and how good are the players coming off the bench to replace the injured stars. So it's easy to point to Purdy and be like, it's all Purdy. But, here's the thing. If you go into the locker room and talk to those Niner players, there's respect for Purdy in there that transcends, the wins and the losses. And they know he's the real deal. There's nothing accidental about his success. He's successful because he's smart, he processes well, and he knows where to go with the football. For the most part, he doesn't turn it over. But, if you want to go look at Brock Purdy as a prospect going back to Iowa State, what was his downfall? Occasionally, he would try to fit the ball into too tight of windows and tried too hard to make plays and didn't take what the defense gave him. He's an aggressive attacker down the field. That's who he is. The people who hated him wanted to call him Dink and Dunk. But you know what? He was never Dink and Dunk. If anything, what Brock Purdy needs to do more of is when his equation bogs down and he doesn't have an Ayuk or doesn't have a Debo, he needs to take fewer shots down the field, be less aggressive, and take what the defense gives you and be a little bit more methodical and be more patient. It's against his nature because he's an aggressive quarterback, but that's what he needs to do. Right, and the second stat that he brought up, I think, is even probably a little bit more interesting, and that is, do you believe Kyle Van Noy was right? You say, who's Kyle Van Noy, crew? Kyle Van Noy is the former Patriot and Raven linebacker who said after Christmas night when the Ravens beat the 49ers that the Ravens didn't just beat the Niners, but they actually provided for the rest of the NFL a blueprint on how to beat Brock Purdy and the 49ers. So it is interesting. You look at Brock's first 21 starts pre-Christmas night against the Ravens. He was 18-3. He had completed 68%. 31 points a game the Niners were averaging. He was averaging passing for 259 a game, 9.6 yards per attempt, 47 touchdowns, which is a ton, 11 total turnovers, and 118 passer rating. Since Christmas and the loss to the Ravens, now that includes the loss to the Ravens, a playoff game against Green Bay, a playoff game against Detroit, a Super Bowl against Kansas City, and the first 7 weeks of this regular season. His last 12 starts since Christmas night. He's 6-6. He's completing 63.5%. The Niners are still averaging 25.5 points a game, not 31. They're down 5 points a game. The passing yards of Purdy are identical. 259 in his first 21 starts, 258.3 in his last 12 starts. Yards per attempt, very comparable, 9.6 to 8.1. The big difference is the turnovers and the lack of touchdowns. In the first 21 starts, 47 touchdowns. In the last 12 starts, only 16 touchdowns. 11 turnovers in the first 21 starts, 14 turnovers in the last 12 starts, and obviously the passer rating, 118 in the first 21, 87.8 in the last 12. All right, so what exactly did the Ravens do in that game that Van Noy says, it's a blueprint? They just took advantage of the fact that the Niners will use condensed formations, and they blitzed their corners off the edges and dropped guys into the middle, both in the short and intermediate. and they just read the quarterback's eyes. They have, the thing about why it's not the blueprint is that other teams don't have what the Ravens have. They don't have Kyle Hamilton. They don't have Geno Stone. They don't have Patrick Queen. They don't have Roquan Smith. That's, to me, if you wanted to say why did the Ravens have success that day, I thought the scheme was smart that Mike McDonald threw at them. If they're going to have these condensed formations, well, then we'll blitz corners off the edge because they're really close and they'll get home, right? A corner coming off the edge in a condensed formation off the slot is 3 steps away from the quarterback. So then you're forcing the ball to come out before the quarterback wants to, and then he's looking for the in-breaker because that's the strength of his game, is finding the in-breaking routes. Though he'll throw it with conviction to the sidelines, he likes to throw the in-breaking routes, and what did they do? They dropped some really great, maybe the Ravens, you could argue, between Stone and Hamilton and Queen and Roquan, have maybe the best 4 interior defenders on the second and third levels of any teams that we've seen maybe in our lifetime. Literally, they're talking about great inside backers, great safeties, all dropping to the middle of the field, reading the quarterback's eyes and trying to break on the ball. It was a smart plan. Now, other teams haven't copied that plan per se, but there's a little bit more of an emphasis as, it's like anything else. There's guys that make 6-figure incomes to go around and scout other teams and figure out how to turn off their water. And so teams studied Brock Purdy and said, man, he's completing almost 70%. He's averaging 30 a game. What does he like to do? He likes to throw these in-breaking routes to Ayuk. The Niner receivers have one thing that other receiving cores don't have. They live across the middle of the field, and there's not an ounce of fear. Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, CMC, Juszczyk. Basically everybody who's a weapon for the Niners runs across the middle of the field like they freaking own it. So how do you counter that? You drop bodies into the middle of the field. You make them do something else. You make them show that they can work outside the numbers. You make them show that you take away what they like to do and make them uncomfortable. And I think to some degree teams have done that. And it's up to Purdy to adjust. Now, why have the Niners struggled? I think it's more personnel related. I really do. I don't think they have a complementary receiving core. They don't have a vertical threat that creates space. They don't have, the Chiefs. If you watch the Chiefs in this game, they had 8 and 9 guys in the box on some key third downs, and they just dared the 49ers to beat them over the top, but the Niners don't have the speed to do it. And why did you see the Niners go with a little curl and go to Jacob Cowing in the second half? Because they're being defended inside of a 12-yard box and being suffocated by the defense because nobody respects their deep speed. So what's the answer? Get Cowing on the field and throw the ball to him down the field. What's the answer going forward? Go get some more deep speed. Go get a Tutu Atwell. Go get one of the half dozen receivers that are out there that run sub 4.4. Get more vertical speed, and you'll see the space open up. Right now, teams can defend the Niners and crowd the middle of the field against Brock Purdy because they don't respect you throwing the ball over their head. And it's not because Purdy doesn't have the arm strength, it's because the Niners don't have a weapon that can run. Debo, slow. JJ, slow. Ayuk, out. Pearsall, 4.4, but he got 1.9 yards of separation yesterday, or Sunday. The only vertical threat they have is Guerendo and Cowing. Guerendo and Cowing run sub 4.4. That's the only speed they have. Guerendo can't be trusted. He fumbles. Cowing's small and lacks physicality. They need a vertical threat. They need 4.3 speed. They need to create more space on the field. I'll leave you with one last thought. And I've said this before, so don't roll your eyes if you've heard it before. Football's real simple. Offensive football is about creating space. Defensive football is about the ability to close that space down. Both require speed. It takes speed to close down space. It takes speed to create space. There's a reason that so many people make such a big deal about what's his 40 time. Kyle has said, I've asked him this question 5 times in the last 5 or 6 seasons. I probably shouldn't because he always answers it the same way. When you're a play caller, having vertical speed to run off the top of the defense and create that space is integral. Integral. And the 49ers somehow got to the Super Bowl last year with no deep speed to speak of. It was an amazing accomplishment. But guess what? When you don't have deep speed, everybody's leaning forward, everybody's leaning up and making plays in front of them. They need more vertical speed at wide receiver. All right, thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles for sponsoring this video. Thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.